When you think about console generations, going from one to another in today's world isn't as exciting or revolutionary. Aside from slightly better graphics and faster loading times, there's not a whole lot that new console generations can provide nowadays, especially with desktop PCs being more accessible and powerful than ever before. Back in the early to mid 2000s though, advancing into a new console generation was a huge deal. PCs weren't as widespread, there was enough room for innovation on the market to warrant a generational change, the industry wasn't as greedy as it is today, etc. While I would argue that the leap from the 5th to the 6th generation of consoles was the biggest jump the gaming industry has seen, the 6th to 7th gen transition was incredible too. In fact, I would say that from the beginning of the 6th generation to the end of the 7th generation was console gaming's peak. Focusing on the 7th generation of consoles, let's talk about the one that helped shape my preteen and early teenage years, the Xbox 360. Whether I was playing Black Ops 2 with friends after school, at a friend's house for a sleepover playing split-screen Halo Reach, or writing out the remainder of my childhood NASCAR fixation before I would focus on other interests, the Xbox 360 will always have a special place in my heart. But there's one more reason why this console is so special to me. For anyone who may be checking out my channel for the first time with this video, hi! My name is Thunderous Fulf, and my favorite video game franchise of all time is Ace Combat. I can't imagine my life without this franchise nowadays, but believe it or not, there was a point in my life where I didn't know about Ace Combat. I had known about the concept of jets and flying and all, and I had seen them coming in to save the day in games like Call of Duty, but aside from instances like climbing into the Afterburner Climax arcade cabinet when my family and I would go to Chuck E. Cheese, I had never gotten to fly one of these planes myself. So when I came across the demo for Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation one day while idly browsing the Xbox Live Marketplace, my interest was piqued. When I took to the Ace Combat skies for the first time at that F-16, I hit the Afterburners and never looked back. From that moment forward, Ace Combat would become a part of my life. But for as much as I enjoyed the demo, and eventually the full game, there was a lot that I missed out on due to me being, well, a kid. Revisiting this game today as an adult, I'm ready to take a closer look at what Ace Combat 6 does well, along with what it doesn't do so well. As is the case with Ace Combat games most of the time, there's more than meets the eye here. Not only does this game provide large-scale warfare on never-before-seen levels thanks to the Xbox 360's hardware, but it also tells one of the greatest tragedies of a broken nation looking to reclaim its former glory, introduced DLC support, introduced online play. There is a lot to cover for this game. So, may the Golden King smile upon us as we take to the skies and ignite the fires of liberation.
We're going to take back Gracemeria today.
Large army versus large army. This was the core idea the team had for Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation during its development. With Project Aces having access to more powerful hardware with the Xbox 360, they wanted to test just how far they could push things when it came to the scale of battles. However, the team faced difficulties right out the gate. This was because Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation and Ace Combat 0 The Belkan War were being developed at the same time. As I said in my Ace Combat 0 retrospective, Project Aces was split during this time, not just literally, but ideologically as well. One part of the team was focused on making sure their last sortie into the PS2 skies went off with a bang. Meanwhile, the other part of the team was making sure their first sortie into the Xbox 360 skies was a strong one, looking to the future and all of the potential that could come from it. While we don't have an exact date for when Ace Combat 6's development began, we can get an estimate. Ace Combat 0's development began sometime between October and December 2004, and Xbox 360 beta development kits were sent out sometime between late late 2004 and early 2005. I'm willing to bet that around this time, Bandai Namco and Project Aces got some ideas going in their heads for an Ace Combat game on the 7th generation of consoles. Prototype drafts of Ace Combat 6 probably began to show up during this time, with more precise details and revisions being added later. Therefore, Ace Combat 6's development probably began sometime in early to mid 2005, with Ace Combat 0 being released in early to late 2006 and Ace Combat 6 being released in late 2007. This means Ace Combat 6 spent roughly half of its development with a split team, assuming the estimated start date is correct. While no exact details are given here, I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for the people assigned to both 0 and 6 to be working on something, come across some kind of roadblock, and then only part of the team is there to help instead of everyone. This frustration was probably doubled in Ace Combat 6's case since the team wanted to include online multiplayer into this game. While multiplayer itself wasn't anything new to Ace Combat up to this point, online play was uncharted territory. Air Combat, Ace Combat 4, and Ace Combat 0 have split screen, and Ace Combat X has ad hoc. You and anyone else you're playing with need to be in the same room for these multiplayer experiences to work, outside of emulation in Ace Combat X's case. Ace Combat 6 is the first game in the series where you and anyone else you're playing with can be in separate locations. One major shakeup that can't be ignored regarding the development of this game is the Xbox 360 exclusivity. Aside from Ace Combat Advance, every single previous Ace Combat game had been exclusively on a PlayStation system. So to not only release the game on the Xbox 360, but for the game to be exclusive to that system was a huge change for this franchise. People have raised a couple of theories over the years as to why this decision was made. Microsoft shelling out some money or meddling on the part of leadership are two that I've seen. But the theory that I subscribe to is that Project Aces saw the PS3 as too complex of a monster to try and tame at that moment in time. Even though the official stated reason by the director of Ace Combat 6, Natsuki Izaki, was that they didn't want to keep the fans waiting too long, I have a hunch that he and everyone else wanted to make a PS3 version but couldn't. But they also couldn't publicly talk shit about how hard it was to make a game for the PS3, so they just stuck with the not wanting to keep the fans waiting part of their answer. I don't think Natsuki Izaki was lying when he said this. I'm sure a big part of the drive to focus on the 360 was to ensure people weren't waiting for too long. I'm just saying there's probably more to it that couldn't be said publicly. It also probably didn't help that the devs had a solid chunk of time to become familiar with the Xbox 360 first. PlayStation 3 dev kits began to make their way to people in mid-2006. Keep in mind, Ace Combat 0 had only recently been released in Japan and North America, and people were still getting things arranged for the European version's release. This means the team have only had a couple of months where they've been fully back together, as the logistics of the European version's release at this time was most likely being handled by higher-ups. Project Aces have had to spend the past couple of months getting those who were assigned to continue working on Ace Combat 0 up to speed on not just how the 360 worked, but the project as a whole. So to then have a whole new system enter the equation in the midst of all this sounds like hell to manage. You'd have a group of people who already knew how the 360 worked trying to pass that knowledge onto those who were catching up, and then suddenly everyone would need to learn the PS3 from scratch at the same time. Since the PlayStation 3 was never before seen tech at this time, as was the Xbox 360, keep in mind, it was probably too much for Project Aces to handle. And even if the team wanted to try and make a PS3 version, the system was notoriously difficult to work with. There are countless tales of the trials and tribulations of game development for this thing. Whether Bandai Namco and Project Aces caught word from other people about this, or if they did indeed attempt to make a PS3 version of Ace Combat 6 and bailed out early on, it would have caused a lot more stress and anxiety for the team. That being said, in hindsight, maybe it would have been better in the long run for the team to grit their teeth and make a PS3 version. When the game was released, the sales, to put it politely, were lackluster. Ace Combat 6 is the lowest selling console title in the franchise at around 700,000 copies sold. To put that number into perspective, Ace Combat 4, 5, and 0 sold 2.64 million, 1.82 million, and roughly 800,000 copies respectively. The major reason for this low number is because of the Xbox 360 exclusivity. This console didn't do very well in Japan. For reference, the PlayStation 2 had reached 21.45 million units by October 2008. The Xbox 360 didn't even cross the 1 million mark until March 2009. So of course Ace Combat 6 didn't sell well in Japan, since lots of people didn't have the system to play it on to begin with. And this low sales figure stings, because while I wouldn't consider 6 to be an S-tier game, I do consider it to be very solid, as in an A-tier game. And it also helps that, in my case, it's got a special place in my heart since it's the first Ace Combat game that I played, which I think to wrap up the development part of this video, I'm gonna go into a little more detail about that first time experience. Consider this the development of my interest in Ace Combat. I don't have exact years or dates or anything of the like, but I can still recall exactly how I was made aware of and eventually got Ace Combat 6. Back when I was a preteen, back when things were more simple, less stressful, more joyous. Sorry about that. Anyway, back when I was a preteen, I was browsing the Xbox Live Marketplace one day. I was either doing some window shopping, or I had some Microsoft points that I wanted to spend, and I was just looking to see if any games piqued my interest. Oh wait. I just realized, there's probably some of you watching right now who don't know what Microsoft Points were. Dude, how am I about to age myself when I'm only 23? Well, for those of you unfamiliar, Microsoft Points used to be the Xbox 360's virtual currency that you could spend on the Xbox Live Marketplace. You could spend these points on things like costumes and props for your avatar, DLC for games, and even full games through digital downloads back when that was in its infancy. Alright, side objective complete. Back to the task at hand. There I was, looking at all of what was available on the Marketplace when I saw it. A demo for a game called Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation. I either didn't have enough Microsoft points for the full game, or it wasn't available as a full digital download. I forget which. Either way, upon seeing all of the in-game screenshots of these aviation war machines going at it in the sky, I had to give it a try. I downloaded and booted up the demo, hopped into that F-16 for Invasion of Gracemeria, and I was blown away. Like I said at the beginning, aside from when my family and I would go to Chuck E. Cheese and I would get to play with the Afterburner Climax arcade cabinet, I had never played a game like this before in my life. The large-scale battle of the Estevakian invasion of Gracemeria sold me. I remember replaying that demo over and over again, and even asking my parents for this game for Christmas. Fast forward to Christmas of that year, and sure enough, I got it. I distinctly remember that my family and I were over at my grandparents' house on my stepfather's side, and one of the gifts under the tree was Ace Combat 6. I also have this funny memory of essentially quitting the game for a while after Heavy Command Cruiser. So there I am playing through the game, right? I must have missed the whole we gotta take back our country aspect of the plot and was just left wondering, when are we gonna get to fight the big aerial fortress? Because to be fair, the Aigayon and her Nimbus missiles can make a hell of a first impression. So after I take down this giant behemoth, I remember being like, wait, why are we still fighting? We took down the giant beast. We should be done, right? As if all the Estevakians would just jump ship the moment their aerial fortress died. Don't get me wrong, it probably made all the Estevakian troops scared, but they wouldn't just turn tail and run away like that. Oh, I was so stupid back then. I mean, I'm still stupid today, but I was also stupid back then. But now that I'm an adult, having spent my skill points on the Ace Combat and content creation tech trees instead of the math and science tech trees, I'm ready to take a closer look at Ace Combat 6 to see what works and what doesn't. Ace Combat had done large-scale battles in the past before. Ace Combat 4 had missions like Tango Line, Emancipation, Whiskey Corridor, and Siege of Farbani. Ace Combat 5 had missions like Desert Arrow and Desert Lightning. Ace Combat 0 had missions like Bastion and Lying into Sea. But when you compare those large-scale battles to what Ace Combat 6 delivers, you can see the extra power that the Xbox 360 is able to deliver with just how many units are on screen at once. The actual size of the battlefields themselves, like the sandbox environment scale, seems to be the same, but the battles feel much larger due to the increased presence of both allies and enemies. The total count of units on the battlefield at once has increased dramatically, truly giving that large army versus large army feeling the developers were going after. This brings us to the main thing that Ace Combat 6 is known for, the dynamic mission system. While Ace Combat 6 does have its fair share of missions with linear objectives that you need to complete in a specific order, the game also has its fair share of these more open-ended missions. Whenever you sortie for one of these missions, you'll first be allowed to pick a spawn point. This will dictate which allies you spawn close to in order to begin their operations. There could be anywhere from 3 to 6 operations going on at the same time. These operations contain individual battles that are raging on. When combining all of these operations into the grandiose nature of the fight as a whole, that is what truly allows Ace Combat 6 to achieve its goal of large army versus large army. You'll be required to achieve a specific number of successful operations during the first stage of the mission before it'll update and allow you to advance to the second stage. As you destroy targets and complete these operations, this set of 5 different bars will begin to fill up. These serve as your currency for calling in help when you need it. And let me tell you, your fellow Amerians can lay waste to the Estevakians. Allied Attack pings any enemies directly at your 12, where your allies who are available will chip in and focus their fire on those targets for a short period of time. Allied Cover pings any enemies targeting you, where once again, your allies will focus their fire on the specified targets for a short period of time. As you complete operations, extra allies who were a part of those will join up with you in order to aid in assisting other friendlies since their mission tasks are now achieved. Of course, you've got your fellow pilots who will chip in to help whenever you need support, but you also have access to calling in help from ground and naval forces too. If you complete an operation for some sailors out at sea, when you need support with anti-air fire or naval artillery against ground and or naval threats, they'll be more than happy to lend a hand. And if you need help with some enemy ground forces, allied tanks and mobile artillery can chip in as well. This, in combination with your current plane and special weapon available at your disposal, creates this strategy element that I think works really well. As usual, it's crucial to pay attention to the briefings in this game, as they'll give vital pieces of information about what each group of allies will be doing in their operation, as well as outlining what the ultimate goal of the mission itself is. Finding that perfect balance of what you're able to bring in a battle, along with asking allies for help in areas where you're lacking, is crucial to finding success in this game. I also really appreciate how each group that you help are named units that you see again and again over the course of the campaign. All of these people have distinct voices and personalities that make them stand out, both in and out of combat.
All enemy bombers have been eliminated. We somehow plugged every last one of them. Enemy bomber formation is confirmed down. I have to say you handled things well. Putting all that brains on us has got me a little too red in the face to go back home. Roger that, Avalanche. I'll just report you as gunned down and missing in action. That's pretty harsh, Ghost Eye. All planes, it's time to get on home now. Try and make it back for supper. They can't handle us. Time to play with the bastards. That's what I like to hear. All enemy fighters have been destroyed. Well done. Even now, Garuda? Avalanche, I got that fighter off your tail. Looks like you still got a loan to pay off. But don't forget about that second Typhoon I shot down from you. That ought to count for something. You two have a lot to learn from Telstra. He never takes out loans up here.
But along with each of the different allied units that join you in battle, you also have a wingman, Garuda 2, Shamrock. Randomly assigned as your number 2 as you're preparing to defend Gracemeria in the first mission, Shamrock is a solid wingman to have around. The wingman command system has received a bit of a downgrade in that you can only tell Shamrock to attack a target or to cover your 6. You can't tell Shamrock when to use special weapons or to only focus on a specific kind of target like you could with Pixie, for instance. While Shamrock's actual combat performance is pretty solid, not being able to command him on some of the finer details of battle does lead to his effectiveness being not as strong in comparison. Taking a look at the aircraft next, Ace Combat 6's list of flyable planes is noticeably smaller than the other games. In fact, this game has the distinction of having the least amount of playable aircraft in any mainline Ace Combat game at only 15 of them. I would definitely consider this a negative, as part of the reason we play these games is to fly a bunch of different aircraft. So to have our options limited, especially in comparison to how many aircraft other Ace Combat games have, does sting. You've got your usual 3 classifications of aircraft here: fighter, multi-role, and attacker, which have a focus on air-to-air, jack-of-all-trades, and air-to-ground respectively. In fact, thinking about it, it's quite ironic that this game has medals for completing playthroughs with only a single aircraft type, yet the number of available aircraft to pick from is low. At least the specific planes we get are all well-known ones: the F-16, A-10, F-14D, F-15E, F-22, etc. However, out of all the aircraft in this game, there is one that stands out as my personal favorite Ace Combat aircraft. The CFA-44 Nosferatu, Slovakia's next-generation carrier-based aircraft that can turn the tide of battle with some of the most overpowered and busted weaponry imaginable. Do you feel as if you could launch more missiles? How about the special weapon known as the ADMM? All-direction multi-purpose missiles. 3 missile pods, 2 at the top, 1 at the bottom. Each one launches 4 missiles for a total of 12 targets to be obliterated. Or if you're looking for something long-ranged and precise, how about the EML, the electromagnetic launcher, able to snipe enemies out of the sky with unrivaled power, able to one-shot most of them if your aim is true. Oh, and there's the ECM pod too, which is just like any other ECM pod in the game. There's just something so cool to me about this aircraft being so powerful that it's able to turn the tide of a battle with a single button press. Stealthy, sleek, powerful weapons able to wipe out multiple targets at once. And it should go without saying that this aircraft is without question the most powerful one in the game. This power can definitely come in handy when trying to go after those S ranks. Speaking of those S ranks, the way those are calculated is how you do in each operation along with the second phase, or just how you do for the mission as a whole if it doesn't feature the dynamic mission system. And the best part? It's all score-based. You can take as long as you need to. So long as you satisfy those point requirements, you'll be all set. This is how S-ranks should be done. None of that Assault Horizon Legacy time-based S-rank bullshit. To me, S-ranks should demonstrate that you're able to clean up the battlefield by proving you're able to put yourself at risk for longer, not how fast you can speedrun the game. Turning to the extras that this game has to offer, medals and the assault record both make a return here. You've got medals for shooting down enemies, completing the game without taking any damage, completing the campaign with just your cannon, etc. For the assault records, along with the enemy aces that you can shoot down, there are also ally entries that contain info on the various friendly air, ground, and naval units that join you on operations. I wish the future Ace Combat games continued to include information about your allies in the assault records. Yeah, info about your allies and enemies are readily available on places like the Ace Combat Wiki, but for there to be places in-game to read all that info would go a long way. Onto the peripherals, this was the best looking Ace Combat game at this point in time. I would argue that it still holds up today with things like the aircraft models. I don't remember the missile trails and explosions looking this pixelated before, but I think that's a result of me playing the game through Xenia Canary and not on original hardware. Regarding the music, while Ace Combat 6's list isn't my absolute favorite by any stretch of the imagination, I do still really like it. The game's music leaned towards a more atmospheric approach, if I'm making any sense there. Some of my personal favorites include Sipley Field, The Dead Sea, Fires of Liberation, and of course, the best track in this game in my eyes, The Liberation of Gracemeria. There's one more thing to talk about for the gameplay section before we move on to the story: the DLC. Ace Combat 6 was the first Ace Combat game to feature pre-order bonuses and post-launch support via downloadable content. Not only did this come in the form of different skins for the aircraft in the game, but also remixed campaign missions for a new difficulty level along with some multiplayer modes. Unfortunately, all of the game's DLC got taken off the Xbox Live Marketplace back in 2016. But if you know where to look, you can get those DLCs working again. Not only do these these different skins look cool, being either aces from previous games or entirely new skins, but they also have different stats and characteristics from the base version. The Mobius 1 F-22, for example, is a glass cannon, trading in most of its defense for increased maneuverability and targeting capabilities. The Scarface Su-33 doesn't have any special weapons since those weren't a thing in Ace Combat 2, you get the idea. The other part of the single-player DLC to this game is the Ace of Aces difficulty. Those of you who have played Project Wingman may be seeing some similarities between the mercenary difficulty in that game and here. Ace of Aces contains 5 remixed missions of the campaign, specifically Invasion of Gracemeria, Vitose Aerial Defense, Sipley Field, Bartolomeo Fortress, and Heavy Command Cruiser. Something tells me that Project Aces had planned to do an Ace of Aces remix for every mission since all of them are displayed in this difficulty. That, and any mission that doesn't have an Ace of Aces variant has the "you must download it from the Xbox Live Marketplace" text at the bottom. Notable changes to these missions include such things like the Igaion showing up in Invasion of Gracemeria instead of being off screen. Yet we don't actually get to fight it, so why is it even here? Gaijus airships showing up in Vitose Aerial Defense, high-velocity air-to-air missiles in Sipley Field, the Igaion showing up again in Bartolomeo Fortress, but this time we actually get to fight it, and going up against a big naval fleet before fighting the Igaion and her fleet in Heavy Command Cruiser. Makes me wonder what the other missions would have as their Ace of Aces variants. God, Liberation of Gracemeria Ace of Aces would be hell. It's already difficult enough to S-rank it from needing to shoot down a number of the UAVs during Pasternak's boss fight, but an Ace of Aces variant of that? It wouldn't surprise me if when you get to the Pasternak boss fight, the UAVs would be able to fire ADMM bursts as well, to the point that it would make late-game Project Wingman Conquest runs blush with the number of missiles in the air. Either way, these remixed missions give players more things to do, and it's quite refreshing to be faced with different conditions. A nice change of pace from how these missions normally go, especially if you've been recently playing them a bunch for things like S-ranks and medals. So, a lot of single-player content is on offer here, but the game's gotta give you even more drive to want to complete it beyond gameplay feedback loops, right? Luckily, Ace Combat 6 has that with its story, and while some parts of it I feel do take away from the overall experience, if you do a little bit of digging and really immerse yourself in the world of Fires of Liberation, you'll be presented with one of the greatest tragedies to ever happen to a nation in this universe. On the surface, Ace Combat 6's story is about Ameria losing nearly everything and then coming back from the brink in order to win. But if you take a deeper look, there's so much more than meets the eye. This game does a good job of conveying the story of fighting tooth and nail to liberate your country. Mostly in the missions themselves, as I find that some of the subplots and the cutscenes do take away from it a little. But beneath that, if you take a deeper look at things like the assault records and the Ace Combat Wiki, you begin to realize that there is just as intriguing and tragic of a story to tell for the opposing country in this game. Therefore, when talking about the story, I'm going to be shifting my focus between the Amerian and Estevakian perspectives. And to start, we have to once again revisit the Ulysses asteroid impact. Although the Ulysses asteroid was discovered back in 1994 and predicted impact points were sent out in 1996, Estevakia didn't begin work on their anti-asteroid countermeasures until 1998. This was because the original predictions from 1996 made it seem like the Anian continent, which houses countries like Ameria and Estevakia, was safe. However, it turned out that the predicted impact radius was wider than expected, and this info wasn't made public until 1998. With the asteroid making impact in July 1999, this only gave Estevakia anywhere from a couple of months to at most a year and some change to develop the Chandelier, a long-range anti-asteroid railgun. However, they couldn't complete it in time, which resulted in the country being among the most damaged when the dust had settled. Hundreds of thousands were now dead, the economy was in shambles, and any form of government had been vaporized. Although Ameria, who made it through the Ulysses impact event just fine, tried to help their neighboring country, their efforts would be in vain. Estevakia descended into a civil war in 2007 between primarily the Lies United Front and Eastern faction. There were a few other factions part of this civil war, but we'll just be focusing on the two major ones here. Originally, Ameria was sending supplies and aid to the Lies United Front for the opening years of the civil war so that Estevakia could be rebuilt. However, upon discovering that this aid was being used to help fight the other factions instead of being used to help rebuild the country, Ameria halted their aid program towards Estevakia in 2010 and fully shut the door on them them in 2011. The Estavakian Civil War lasted until 2013, with the Eastern faction being the victor. With the Civil War I, a group within the Eastern faction known as the Generals, a collection of high-ranking officers, took on leadership duties for Estavakia. Over the next 2 years, Estavakia would do its best to rebuild from the devastation, with Ameria restarting its aid program to the country now that the Civil War was over. However, guerrilla warfare from the Allies United Front soldiers still loyal to their cause resulted in road bumps along the way. Along with that, Estavakia began to point the finger at Ameria for the aid they sent to the Allies United Front during the Civil War, claiming that it was the Allies United Front who misused this aid, and pointing out the fact that they stopped giving it once these revelations were discovered. Ameria said that they were still willing to help with Estavakia's ongoing efforts to rebuild. But Estavakia wasn't having it. Having a sour taste in their mouths from Ameria's history of helping their main rival faction, coupled with the country still in a dire state of affairs with its resources, the Generals, and Estavakia as a whole, prepared for war. And sure enough, on August 30th, 2015, the Estavakian invasion of Ameria began, starting with the capital, Gracemeria. To put into perspective just how different Invasion of Gracemeria is from a story perspective, we need to talk about how you lose this battle in the end. We've had undesirable outcomes and missions in previous Ace Combat games, but we've never had to commence a full-blown retreat like this in-game before. And while the war itself isn't lost at the end of Invasion of Gracemeria, it does show how dire the situation is for Ameria. Previous Ace Combat games have had us backed into a corner before, and then as we progress through the game, we take over more and more ground until we reach something like the enemy's capital. But for us to be retaking ground while going after our own capital hits different. This was done before with Ace Combat X, us as Griffiths 1 retaking Griswold from Laysaf, but in Skies of Deception, the story took a bit of a backseat in favor of focusing more on the gameplay. Nothing wrong with that, but as a result, the story of retaking the capital and country at large isn't as emphasized. Here, with the story being more prevalent, even if, again, in some instances I feel as if the execution isn't done that well, it's able to get that stronger emphasis on the end goal. For the whole campaign, this is what we're aiming for. Another reason why it hits harder in Ace Combat 6 as opposed to X is because of the different named ally units that pair up with you. Yeah, you had different named allies in X, but they usually only showed up for a single mission, and you didn't really get a chance to truly bond or connect with them. In Ace Combat 6, because you support multiple named allied units again and again over the course of the campaign, you get a chance to form those connections and bonds with them. And through things like the allied attack and cover gameplay mechanics, your allies get a chance to return the favor in moments when you need help. From this point on, you begin to slowly but surely retake ground. Meanwhile, the Estavakians are putting up as good of a fight as they can, but they're no match for you and the rest of the Amerian military. A neat storytelling element that isn't all up in your face, but is still present in the minute-to-minute gameplay, is how no matter how much of an ace pilot you are, you can't save everyone. We've been taught this lesson before with instances like Chopper's death in Ace Combat 5. While this time it's a small background element, it does hurt to hear a request for support from a unit that's under heavy fire, but since you're currently supporting another group of allies, you can't respond to that request. It doubly stings when they call for you directly, but you can't go and help.
Our fleet's taken too much damage. Don't let them take any more hits.
And in the midst of all this fighting, as you get closer to the end of the game, this is where the tragedy of Estavakia begins to take shape. You see, it was already devastating enough for Estavakia to be essentially lied to regarding the Ulysses asteroid, and then getting eviscerated by it later on. It was already devastating enough that following the impact of those asteroid fragments, the country descended into a civil war that lasted 6 years. But what makes it all even more tragic is that after the Civil War, after the generals came into power, they thought the only way to move forward was through war. Not only would they be getting back at Ameria for their support towards the Allies United Front during the Civil War, but they'd be reviving their economy and gaining a bountiful amount of resources that could then be used in helping the ongoing rebuilding efforts. The only option that seemed to be the solution to the country's problems was war. Hundreds of thousands of troops dead, the symbol of their military might and prowess at the bottom of the ocean, hundreds of thousands of civilians back home grieving and upset, growing increasingly more frustrated at the authoritarian military regime. Out of everything shown in this game, though, the last mission perfectly encapsulates the tragedy of Estavakia. But before we get to that, let's talk about our buddy Shamrock for a little bit. Ace Combat is already known for not pulling any punches when it comes to heavy-hitting topics. Losing wingmen, witnessing one of the most heinous acts any country's military could do to itself to end a war, one man being willing to throw his country into war for the sake of money, and even losing family members. Keeping that last one in particular particular in mind, Shamrock's wife and daughter live in Gracemeria. This means they were put in danger during the invasion of Gracemeria, potentially subjected to the Estevakian occupation of the capital, and then potentially put in danger once again during the liberation of Gracemeria. There's a reason why I'm saying potentially. For Shamrock, there was that hope that his wife and daughter would still be alive by the time he and the rest of the Amarian military made it back. A little gameplay bit that I feel is fitting to include here: whenever you pick Shamrock's plane and special weapon, he always has the following dialogue.
Garuda 1, which plane should I select? How about my weaponry? Are we ready to fly with these planes?
Garuda team, time to take off.
However, when you go to pick his plane and special weapon for Gracemeria Patrol,
Garuda team, time to take off.
this immediately lets the player know that something isn't right. Shamrock has never been silent here, and then we hear Shamrock sounding tired over comms.
Garuda 2, takeoff position has been granted. Check in the skies.
Garuda 2. Roger. Sorry I'm late.
He's never usually this quiet. Honestly, he's probably just tired and ready to relax after having liberated the capital. But after we're done with our patrol, as we're waiting for permission to land, Shamrock breaks the news.
Talisman, think you can go out with Avalanche instead of me? I hope you don't mind. I need to be alone tonight. My wife and daughter are both dead. It's just been confirmed. I saved my country, but I lost my family. What kind of an ace can't even protect his own family? Monica and Jessica. How could I let this happen? Once this mission's over, I'm turning in my wings. I've had it. I have no more reason to fly.
Invasion of Gracemeria takes place on August 30th, 2015. Gracemeria Patrol takes place on March 31st, 2016. For 7 months, Shamrock has been worried sick over his wife and daughter in the midst of all this fighting. Not a day went by where he didn't think of them. So for him to fight through this war, hoping they'll be alive and well when he makes it back, only to learn that they died, saying that he feels devastated would be an understatement. And the worst part, we don't even know when they died. For all we know, they both died during the initial invasion of Gracemeria, but nobody let Shamrock know because everyone was in disarray at the beginning of the war. Or maybe they lived up until the liberation of Gracemeria, having gotten killed in the fighting. We don't know though, and that's what makes Monica's and Jessica's death all the more sad. Shamrock plans to turn in his wings when this patrol is done, but he decides to remain in service after defending Gracemeria from the last card that Estevakia is playing for this war. The Chandelier was never able to save Estevakia from Ulysses. A mixture of there being not enough time along with internal politics caused the project to be bogged down to the point of it being too late. During the Estevakian Civil War, construction on it was resumed in secret on the part of the Eastern faction, but due to energy and cooling issues, the weapon was never used. And then during the Ameria-Estevakia War, construction on it was finally completed towards the tail end of the conflict. Estevakian leadership aimed to use it as a retaliatory weapon to strike at Gracemeria, but by this point, the war is all but lost. Estevakia was pushed out of Ameria as a whole, their troops either dead or tired. In comparison to the Estevakian forces that were deployed at the beginning of this war, only a handful of them are still alive, let alone willing to fight. The majority of the armed forces aren't willing to continue despite the generals insisting that the war must go on. Those that were willing to continue fighting though, knew just where to meet up. After defending against multiple waves of cruise missiles, Garuda Team and other air squadrons plot a course to the Chandelier. Now, normally, whenever you go up against a gigantic enemy super weapon, it's accompanied by this sort of, "Let's go, it's do or die, baby," kind of attitude. This is conveyed through the music. Rex Tremende and Megalith in Ace Combat 4, Excalibur in Ace Combat 0, and the Dead Sea in Ace Combat 6, to name a few. All of these tracks have that kind of, "let's do this" energy to them, which makes the music that plays during Chandelier stand out for how different it is. To me, Chandelier, the name for both the music and the mission itself, is the perfect representation for the state of Estivacia at this point. A slower, more atmospheric track that allows you to really take in what's happening. Yeah, the danger of the Chandelier raining hellfire on Gracemeria is very real, but at this point, the remnant Estivacian forces in their fight, while threatening, is also just sad to witness. You can't help but to feel pity against the Estivacians who are still putting up a fight, and sadness for the country as a whole. The country that went through being utterly ruined by Ulysses, a 6-year civil war, and a switch to an authoritarian military regime, now lies in ruins once again. What was originally intended to be the savior of Estivacia now sits here as a tool for the soldiers, sailors, and airmen who stand guard to wage one final battle. Not to win the war, but to cause as much hellfire as possible before their time is up. Through the lyrics of Chandelier, we get a sense that this chapter in Estivacia's history needs to end. It needs to end for the sake of the next generation. And with this chapter's end, whoever is left will be able to march on into a new, and hopefully better, era.
Its barrel just opened up. That ugly thing's starting to heat up on the barrel. Its vital area is back behind the barrel. Talisman, we can trust you with this, right?
With the Chandelier destroyed, this finally brings an end to the Ameria-Estivacia War. AWACS Ghost Eye then wraps a bow to this game with his final words.
I saw the cannon go down. All planes, it's the end of the war. We finally did it! The rooted team did it! We took that baby out! Talisman, you are the man! Hey, Jimmy, now you can go see the crew. Look, Talisman, the sun's coming up. Even after the darkest nights, morning always comes. Those we've lost gave their lives to bring the morning light. Living this day to the fullest is the highest tribute we can offer to their memory. Now come on, let's get back home.
Real quick though, before we move on, let's talk about those subplots I mentioned earlier. Melissa's search for her child Matilda as the war rages on sounds very gripping on paper. And to its credit, this plot point does allow us to catch a glimpse of the civilian perspective of this war, seeing everyone evacuating, crowded into buses or walking together. It reminds us of how war affects those both in and out of the military. But once you get past the opening cinematics, this side story just doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't quite fall apart per se, it just comes off as a needless interruption from the main plot. What does fall apart though is the tank crew storyline. Oh my god. Okay, so these people in the middle of the war that is raging on decide to say, screw the war, let's go rob a fucking bank to become rich. I'm not even kidding. That's the side story going on here. And what makes it even worse is that okay, so McKnight and his team go AWOL, right? They make it to the bank, but then they discover the symbol of Ameria, the Golden King. So they either have a change of heart after seeing the Golden King, or they rob the bank first either way, and then prop the king up onto their tank, which I don't even know how they got him on the tank because that thing has to be heavy. And then they just roll into Gracemeria after all the fighting is done and are like, hey, the war is over. There's no indication that they got investigated for going AWOL, or searched to see if they got any extra money on them, or hell, like Sly Ace Zeta pointed out in his Everything Wrong with Ace Combat 6 video, why was this motherfucker allowed to join the military after being convicted of robbing banks? Because it was ultimately this piece of shit, Donnie, that planted the idea in everyone's head. Then again, if everyone else went with the plot and didn't immediately report Donnie to their higher-ups, then they're all just as bad as him. It's like the developers had time traveled to 2008 for a little bit, played through Battlefield Bad Company's campaign, went back, and were like, let's include a little bit of that. Yeah, because nothing says, let's fight to liberate our country like dereliction of duty. In the midst of the ones that don't work in my eyes, there are two of them that do. Tosha and Wojciech. Tosha is an Estevakian pilot who is a part of the Strigan team that we face throughout the campaign. The TLDR here is that Tosha has a lover by the name of Ludmilla, with her pairing up with Melissa as they both head back to Gracemeria. We get to see a glimpse of the Estevakian military through the eyes of a young, patriotic pilot, which I think is great from a storytelling perspective. Very rarely do we get a chance to see the war from the enemy's perspective, so to be able to get a glimpse into their way of thinking and their overall view of the conflict will always be interesting to me. Out of all the side stories in this game though, Wojciech's is the one that hits the hardest for me. Lieutenant Colonel Wojciech entered the Ameria-Estevakia War as a decorated ace pilot. His whole world for the past number of years has been the sky. He was the leader of the Eastern Faction Strigan team during the Estevakian Civil War, the same squadron that would go on to invade Gracemeria. But during the fight over the capital, Wojciech takes a nasty hit. This hit causes him to bail out over Gracemeria, and after his injuries are assessed, it's determined that he can't fly anymore due to his busted leg. Now working as an interrogator of Amerian POWs, Wojciech is unhappy with his new job. Air Force pilots are proud of their profession. They are among the best of the best, the few who get to have a chance to take to the skies in defiance of gravity on a day-to-day basis while being the ones in control. Yeah, being a passenger on something like a commercial airliner can be nice, but to be the one in control, to go as fast as you want to make as many twists and turns as you need or want to go as fast and high as you want to go higher and higher into the sky, to break away from all the problems of life that you gotta deal with on the ground, even for just a moment, is special. So to have that ripped away no doubt stings. We can see it in his facial expression, his tone of voice, his general demeanor, soft-spoken, outside of interrogations at least I presume, still willing to carry out his duty, but with a sense of resentment towards his new position. We can especially see this when he meets up with Ilya Pasternak, the ace pilot sent in as soon as things started getting dire for Estevakia. Wojciech comments about how Pasternak's hatred towards Garuda 1 should have been his passion, his fire, and how the bitter taste of loneliness from being permanently grounded is all he has left.
I asked him if he knew Garuda 1.
Know him? My sole reason of being sent here was to fight him.
He smiled to hide the rage within him. That should have been my passion, my fire. But things have changed. This man is about to step into the world I once knew. My days in this sky are behind me now. The bitter taste of loneliness is all I have left.
But it's this perspective of Ameria from the ground that ends up having one benefit. Had Wojciech continued fighting for Slovakia from the air, perhaps he wouldn't have had the change of heart that he did. Although Wojciech is loyal to his country, upon reflecting on his experiences in Ameria on the ground and seeing the countless innocent lives that would be vaporized by the chandelier, he recognizes that there's a difference between doing his duty and blindly following orders without question. And so, for the sake of not just Ameria, but also for the sake of his own country, Wojciech does his part to help put a stop to the madness that the remnant Slovakian troops have succumbed to. In conclusion, the tragedy of Slovakia is a powerful story. The Melissa subplot is fine, but not noteworthy. Sergeant McKnight and the gang of thieves can go die in a fire. Fucking cowards abandoning their duty. Tosha is nice because we get to see some of the behind the scenes of the Slovakian military, and Wojciech's tale of being grounded, but as a result being in a position to save Ameria is also tragic, but it does end on a happy note. Once again, Ace Combat is able to tell an impactful story to accompany the arcade fight action that takes place on screen. Although certain aspects of it are weaker than others, I think that Ace Combat 6's overall story is still very solid and is worth experiencing. Okay, so, about the multiplayer. I couldn't get it to work. I'll spare you all the details of the hour and a half that was spent trying to get it to work and just skip to the main reason why it all fell apart. Servers. There needs to be a server to connect to in order for Ace Combat 6's multiplayer to be playable through Xenia Canary Netplay. The reason why I was able to get Ace Combat X's multiplayer to work was because there was no server requirement. Ace Combat X has ad hoc, where all you need is for one PSP to be the host device that other people's PSPs can communicate with / connect to. By that logic, all that was needed for Fuzon and I to be in the same lobby was for me to be the host and for Fuzon to connect to me. But instead of PSPs, we were using our PCs with a little bit of trickery from Radman VPN. But no matter if you're hosting or joining, there needs to be a server in the equation for 6, and that changes everything. I have no idea how to make and host a server. Even though this tutorial makes it seem pretty simple, I will be 100% transparent. I'm still scared to do that because I'm sure I'll accidentally dox myself in some way trying to set one up. And then because I don't understand the nuances of server creation and management, I'd probably have it set up in a way that nobody would be able to join or something like that. And I can't rely on other people to have their servers up and running specifically when I need them to, because of course people aren't going to leave their servers up and running 24/7. Electric bills exist after all. Yeah, Ace Combat 6 uses peer-to-peer instead of regular servers, so in theory I could still get a lobby going on my Series X or my original Xbox 360, but I'm not too keen on the idea, since for one, I wouldn't have access to all the DLC, and therefore my playthrough of the multiplayer would be incomplete, and two, with how dead 6's multiplayer is on console, I doubt it would be worth the effort to get my Series X hooked up again, only to spend a whole night searching for lobbies and wind up with nothing. And I'm not about to hop from Reddit thread to Reddit thread or Discord server to Discord server looking and or begging for game nights from people. Hi, could you all help me host a game night for my YouTube video? And even if I manage to get my own server up and running, apparently I can't host lobbies then? So it would be pointless because I'd have to direct someone else how I want the session to go, which defeats the whole purpose of hosting a server, or I would need to ask someone else to set up their own server for me so that I could then host the session in-game? No, people have their own things to do in life. I'm not about to be a pain in someone's ass for that. So, as much as I would like to say otherwise, I'm gonna have to leave this game's multiplayer be for now. I'm sorry that this part of the video is so short and unceremonious, but with how things are looking right now, I'll have to come back to it another time. Which sucks, because looking at the gameplay footage from people who do have servers up and running, it looks like a lot of fun. The PvP modes, I'm gonna be real though, look like ass to play because of the peer-to-peer connection even if servers are needed for it to work on Xenia Canary Netplay, but the co-op missions look like a lot of fun. They remind me of Infinity's PvE modes with needing to complete a set of objectives within a time limit and all. And even though I didn't get to experience it all myself here, it must be emphasized how this marked a big milestone in Ace Combat's history. Although Ace Combat would continue to primarily be a single-player focused franchise, aside from Infinity, multiplayer would become a significant part of the overall experience for later entries for years to come. I also want to quickly give a shout out to Fuzon S again. Although we weren't able to get it working, I'm still super thankful he was willing to take the time out of his day to help me try to get Ace Combat 6's multiplayer working. I was very fortunate to be introduced to the series with Ace Combat 6. Could I have gotten a better introduction with one of the PS2 titles? Perhaps. But I also could have been introduced to Ace Combat with something like Assault Horizon, and I'd take an intro with 6 over an intro with Call of Duty but Planes any day of the week. Looking back on not just this game, but the series as a whole up to this point, I'm glad that I can now really appreciate what Ace Combat 6 tried and the legacy that it would go on to leave. It's not a perfect game by any means, and even with the brownie points it gets with it being my first Ace Combat game along with the CFA 44 debuting here, I can still recognize its problems. But between things like the larger scale of the battles, the introduction of DLC support, having your allies able to pull their weight during fights, a more grandiose try at multiplayer, even if I couldn't experience it all for myself here, all of these elements and more leave me feeling happy that this game exists. From what I've seen in the Ace Combat community, this game is on the more divisive side, and I can understand why. A smaller aircraft roster, some people may not have been big on the dynamic mission system approach to the gameplay, and some of the side story bits can rip you out of the moment. But despite those flaws, Ace Combat 6 is still solid to me. With this successful sortie into the 7th generation skies for the first time, the future was looking bright. Where the Ace Combat series would go from here was anyone's guess, but as long as the developers maintained the core of what Ace Combat was in the midst of how they'd make the next game stand out, things would be just fine.